Hi, I'm Femi OK. Today on the stream, what's next for Iraq after its recent elections? You may remember that youth-led anti-government protests led to these elections being called early. More than 3,000 candidates ran, so we have plenty to talk about. Davar, Rain and Karwan voted. Let's see what they had to say just a few hours ago.
I voted for a Kurdish political party in Iraq's 2021 parliamentary elections because I believe the constitutional rights of the Kurdish people in Iraq have not yet been realized. The preliminary results of the election show that Iraq can hold an election with a minimum amount of fraud and irregularities.
While the focus is understandably on the elections right now, it must be understood that this outcome is expressly linked to the various factors that are destroying Assyrians in Iraq, including a denial of real security, economic marginalization, and social exclusion. Electoral reform is needed to ensure that minority representatives are actually representative of minority populations.
I think it is time now to the Iraqi different parties to put the differences aside and sit together to form a new government, a government that respects federalism to the Iraq, human rights and the minorities, and also provides a better services, security, stability to the Iraqi people.
So let's meet your panel in the studio. Hello, Rasha. Hello to you, Dashni, and hello, Louay. Good to have you here on the stream. I want you to greet our international audience. Rasha, tell everybody who you are and what you do.
I am Rasha Al Aqeedi. I am a senior analyst at Newlines Institute for Strategy and Policy here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome to the stream. Hello, Dashni. Introduce yourself to our international audience.
My name is Dashni Murad. I'm an artist and activist, and I work on advancing gender equality.
Good to have you. No stranger to the international stage. Louay, good to have you. Please remind people who you are and what you do.
Hello, I'm Louay Al-Khatib. I'm a former energy minister of the Iraqi government and currently fellow at the Columbia University.
Let's start with the voting experience. Dashni, you were telling everybody about how exciting it was to get out and vote. How exciting was it to get out and vote?
Well, I think if you compare the election with the previous ones, it was no bomb attacks, there was no curfew, and it was clear that there was some sense of security, and it was very clean. Yes, the turnout was very low, but at the same time, we have to know that the election was a result of the protest happening in Baghdad in 2019. So pushing for elections on time already is a win for the people, and to go out there and to use your right.
Louay.
And I think to me that is very special.
Yeah. Louay, pick up, please.
Well, this election came after to start with, it's the first early elections that are taking place in Iraq post major protest, a protest that came very much like as a result of like 10, 11 years of public resentment, calling for reform and better future for Iraq. And it's about time that Iraq to make a better start, and I'm glad to see that many of the youth made it to Parliament on the basis of the early results that have been published. And let's hope the future holds a better prospect for us.
I'm pulling up a tweet here from Rasha. Rasha, I love your honesty on Twitter. Me, October the 9th, least interesting elections in Iraq ever. Me, October the 11th.
Move over Squid Games.
What happened?
Well, I think, first of all, for all the talk about all the boycott, 41% is, of course, the lowest turnout. But given how much we were hearing about boycott, 41 is not so bad. The last elections, it was 45. So it was not as low as anticipated. I was predicting perhaps 35. So 41 was better than what I had anticipated. Also, the results themselves, some of them were not so, the election results, some of them were not too surprising, but others definitely were. What was very exciting was, as the guest had mentioned previously, the newcomers into the parliament, the protesters, because the protest movement itself had been dismissed for a long time by many observers as not having political influence. It actually did. And in two of the most influential, important provinces in Iraq, in Najaf and Karbala, the fact that these independent grassroots movements actually established themselves and achieved the highest votes, defying the status quo and the establishment, that's very, very huge.
If you're watching on YouTube right now, you can talk to our panel. They know a lot about Iraq and a lot about these recent elections. The comment section is live right now. Jump into the comment section, ask your questions and be part of today's show. Let's look at the turnout in comparison to previous elections, because people were beginning to read something into the turnout, Louay. Let's put up that turnout right now, and then we can look through and just see the difference between 2005, 79%. That is enthusiasm. And then 2021, what am I seeing there, Louay?
Well, let's be realistic. Democracy is something completely new to Iraqis post at least half a century of military rule and dictatorship. So this kind of instrument of living, let it be like in governance or social stand-up and so on, it's yet to be understood and implemented rightly. In terms of the turnout, I don't see any problem with the 41%, even if it's or even if it's lower. If I would compare it to the last election in the UK, that was 37%, and I'm talking about a mature democracy. So realistically speaking, one needs to be much more realistic about what's happening in Iraq. We're talking about a political process that's completely new to the Iraqis, and it's only 18 years old. And it's yet to witness further reform as we progress. Democracy is not something that you can implement over a few years. Certainly, it doesn't mature or develop over a generation. It needs a good 2 generations, to say the least. And looking into developed democracies across the world, we're talking about hundreds of years. So we really need to take this into consideration when we think of the progress. Yes, Iraq lost lots of opportunities when it comes to economic reform, political reform, and social reforms, especially during the good days of high oil prices. But again, it's a learning curve, and the political class that running Iraq since 2003 until now, they've never been into the role of governing Iraq. They lived all their life as opposition. Okay. I'm afraid they are acting like opposition within governments, and they are yet to learn how to rule a country and build a proper state.
Dashni, I've been looking at your Instagram account, and you have spent the last few weeks encouraging people, and I'm going to suggest that they're young people, to get out and vote. You've been very persuasive, very enticing. Let me give our audience a little sense of how you're saying to your audience, to young people, this is important. Let's take a look.
Oh, baby, when you talk like that, you make a woman go mad. So be wise and keep on.
See, Dashni, I have a feeling that the politicians were not campaigning in the same way that you were trying to get people to go out and vote, right? I don't think they were doing that. Hence, maybe the 41%.
It was working.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think a lot of people I spoke to, they said that we don't know much about the candidates because all we see is the posters hanging in the streets. And I learned a lot from the young people, and speaking to even the taxi drivers I was taking, that people have lost trust, and it's a lack of trust in the system because of the corruption and the presence of militia. There were so many reasons of low participation, and people were just being a direct victim of the conflict after conflict. And I recently came back from Sinjar, and the returnees are back to nothing, to ruins. And then you see that people miss so many basic needs like water and electricity. So I stand by the people for boycotting the election, but at the same time, we are giving away our power. And I just wanted to make sure that there is hope. It is because of the protest that had political aspirations. That is the reflection of the election. And it led to, I think right now it's 35 seats that has shaped 11% of the next parliament. So I think we can have trust for the future because it's more of a cleaner turnout. There was less fraud reported, and I hope that people can use this as a hope, because the young people that protested in Baghdad, they brought change and they forced for the elections to be on time.
Rasha, winners and losers in this election. We've only got preliminary results so far, but what can you deduce?
So we do have a decline in the popularity of the armed groups, of militias, their political wing in parliament. Their votes have dropped enormously. And there had been signs on the streets that this has been happening for several years. We don't really hear about it in the media nor in the analysis, but it was there that people were fed up with the assassinations, with the kidnappings, with the extortion, that they wanted a sense of peace, that yes, ISIS is gone, and these groups perhaps played a role in defeating ISIS, even if it was marginal or not, but now they have become the terror, and the people were fed up with them. And at the same time, protests did not help or did not solve, could not change that system, could not even sort of contain their activities. So the only way was to vote against them or not vote for them. That was a massive change. And yes, the grassroots movements that have established themselves now, they were not financially supported. This is key. This is very, very important. They were not backed by any of the mainstream or established parties, and many of the mainstream established parties also failed. We see also a new trend in regional politics. So you have, for example, the Islamic Party of Iraq, which represented the Sunni political wings for several years, is no longer influential. It's been replaced by Mohammed al-Halbousi. For international audience, this is a Sunni politician that came from Anbar, from the Western Province, and has now expanded his influence. However, he does not play on any sectarian identity, really. The only thing that we should be monitoring and observing well is that we will not probably see immediate change within this electoral term. We might see it within the next 10 to 20 years as more grassroots people end up...
Rasha, if you say that to a young person who was in the streets last year, 10 to 20 years, what do you think they're going to say?
Iraqis are patient. We've been in conflict for 40 years. So saying that in 10 years you will see absolutely a change, that we will have a more mature democracy is something that it would be worth investing in and something that they would find very convincing.
If I may say something here, Femi, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Rasha and Dashni mentioned in terms of like the positive addition to the new election that took place. I think 11% is significant added value. I said in previous interviews that if this election produces 5%, it's great news. So looking into the initial results to produce around 11% or more, this is a significant progress. And if this pace of development continues over the next 2 to 3 terms, electoral terms, we could see a complete change across the national scene in Iraq. As I mentioned earlier, democracy it's a journey and it's going to take time. And yes, the Iraqis went through sanctions, wars, and different type of regimes, from monarchy to republic, from centralism to federalism, to totalitarian rule and so on. I think 15 to 20 years, it's not much in that timeline, and time matters. And I'm quite hopeful that the youth will make the change. In fact, even individuals that's running on the tradition on electoral tickets within the traditional parties, the Islamic parties of like ethno-sectarian parties, they tend to talk as like secular and part of like a civil society. So the reform is happening from within. Let it be within the traditional parties or the new parties that have been formed as a result of the protests. These protests, I'm afraid, will continue for over the next few years until demands are met by the people. I cannot see these protests will stop any soon. It may vary in terms of like the intensity of them, but until Iraq witness a significant change in the landscape and basically put an end to corruption, it's going to be quite impossible to stop them.
Okay.
Let's not dismiss hope.
Well, I think that the people really had enough. If you look at the young people, they are so insanely talented and they are so skilled. I mean, I'm not just talking about the Kurdistan region where I come from. I'm talking about people I met through a project. I traveled all around Iraq, from Baghdad to Mosul to Sinjar. I've met with women, I've met with young people, and they are so done right now. And because they are neglected, because they are not contributing to the economy of the country. And I think that's one of the reasons they didn't trust the elections, because they think it's not for them. I am very hopeful with what the election turned out to be. And it also showed to have independent candidate is so important. But right now, there's a stronger message for people that boycotted the election, really sends out a strong message of we can no longer be fooled. We can no longer be deceived. We know what we want, and the people don't care of who's out there. They're just tired of a century of conflict after conflict. They right now want basic needs: waters, electricity, healthcare, women's rights. It has gone all the way down. And right now we're dealing with a climate crisis, and we don't want to be another next charity of the international community, to be another charity of the world. The climate crisis has already hit Iraq, and we need our new government to get their act together. There is hope, and this new election has shown significant change, and the democracy is slow indeed, but they need to act very quickly so that the international or regional influence is less.
So if I can just comment, this is where we kind of need to slow down, because the parliament system in Iraq has been, over the past 15 years, a web of intertwined interests. What's different in this election, however, is there is perhaps for the first time an opposition. For the past 15 years, it's been basically just distributing the gains among different parties according to the ministries that they end up ruling, who gets what, and it doesn't reflect on the people. Lives do not improve. Everything that Dashni had mentioned, none of that has happened, none of that has changed, and it could be getting worse. This is the first time there's an actual opposition. This was the group of people that protested to change the system. They are now part of parliament. So it's kind of like a checks and balances.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing when you put it that way. Just listen to that sentence. They protested, and they're now part of parliament.
They're now, and yes, 11%. Yeah. That's 11 seats. Sorry, that's significant, as Loe was saying. So now they have perhaps enough influence to maybe modify some of the bills, maybe affect some of the changes that Dashni has been mentioning. That has not happened. This is the significant part. However, it's not going to be easy. It's still going to be a battle.
All right, so Rasha, I want to play two video comments to you. The first one is from Marcin.
Yeah.
So he's a research fellow at Harvard Kennedy School, Baghdad, Iraq. Yes. And I can't decide with these two side-by-side comments, is the glass half full or half empty? Okay. Let's start with Marcin.
One of the surprisingly positive outcomes of this election is that despite very low voter turnout, we did see that some of the protest parties that participated in the elections, namely Imtidad and independents as well, who had participated in the protest movement and run in the elections, they achieved a larger number of seats than we had anticipated. And in this way, it seems that the protest movement may be able to make gains in the next 4 years.
All right, so I see Rasha, she's nodding, right? She
Yeah.
agrees with that. But first, not so fast, let us bring in Lahib, because Lahib has a completely different take. Okay. Here she is.
The Iraqi political system suffered a legitimacy crisis already before this election. So this election has been a test for the population's trust in the system, and they've showed to a great degree that this is lacking. The Sadrist made the biggest win in the election, an established political party, which is not likely to make any significant changes in the way that governance is conducted. And even though there were some new parties that made inroads to parliament, their influence is likely to be very low.
So both of these fabulous women, whom I both know personally, are correct. They're both correct.
Okay.
I do tend to agree with Lahib on the term that it will be definitely slower. I agree with Marcin that they can perhaps affect change, but it will be slow. So we're not talking about Muqtada Sadr and his bloc, or even Dawlat al-Qanun or Maliki's state of law bloc conceding anything to the newcomers in parliament. That's not going to happen. So it's going to be conflict. I think my only worry is that this will perhaps derail the voting process on bills and resolutions. That happened in 2011. I believe Luay can comment on this even more, and that stopped many projects. It stopped the progress of many things. My worst fear is that happening. But both of them are correct, and it could go either way.
Okay, you're a good friend to your friends. All right, I'm going to ask you this very briefly because we're right at the end of the show, and I promise our YouTube audience they could also talk to you. Luay, will you take this very briefly? Are the Iraqi people satisfied the election was free and fair? To your best of your knowledge, Luay, go ahead.
Well, this is the best that the Iraqis can expect at this moment in time. There is no perfect scenario, but I would like to build upon a point that Dashni mentioned about the challenge of the climate change, and also what Rasha mentioned on the economy side. I think the biggest challenge that the Iraqis will face is the economic reform. And the economic reform, I'm afraid, is not going to come pain-free. And for this, any government that should come in place must act smart and fast to manage people's expectation, and to run some sort of like a media campaign to educate the people, to basically to bring them from the past of like the reliance and on rentierism and so on,
okay,
through the era of energy transition and accepting market economy. A lot of change need to be considered, but there is no pain-free reform. It's going to take some time. I would say a minimum of 10 years of a stable governance, 10 years with zero interferences from the political parties, especially of their economic agencies and so on.
Yes, we are in the final 2 minutes of our discussion. I want to draw your attention to this on my laptop. We asked at the beginning of this show, what is next for Iraq? What's next for Iraq after the first election since mass protest? In a sentence, Dashni, what would you say? What would you hope for?
The issues are still there, and the next government face a lot of challenges. There is high rate of poverty. There are a lot of school dropouts. COVID-19 was dealt with very weak because our health structure is very weak. People need tangible change in their lives, and I am hopeful because of having 97 females elected, and I hope they'll be the voice, especially of women, to make sure that
Thank you, Dashni.
women's position goes forward.
Rasha, What is next for Iraq in a sentence?
I guess this would rely on the blocs and the alliances that are going to be performed over the next weeks. That will give us a clear picture on whether the country is going to continue in its sort of political stagnation or whether there will be progress. What I can hope for is that this parliament realizes that change is possible and that protests can bring change. And maybe now that there is an opposition within parliament, they might have to change their act.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you guests. Thank you for watching on YouTube and, of course, on TV as well. Have a look here on my laptop. These are 3 guests you will want to follow on Twitter. We have Rasha Dashni. Check out her Instagram. It's fantastic. And Louay as well. Thank you so much, Louay, for being part of this show. Appreciate all of you. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.